I have an announcement to share with you. It says Glenn needs help. Okay, there's more to it than that, but he says he needs help getting 2 or 3 guys to unload 2 or 3 items from his pickup and trailer tomorrow about 2. If you would help Glenn with that, I think it's worth 27 heaven points. And he tells us that those items basically are just pillows, so it's real light and easy, I'm sure. Whenever someone doesn't tell you what the item is, it's not a real good sign that it's going to be light. It's probably a gun safe filled with cement. So good luck with that. If you're able to help Glenn, that would be fantastic. Why do we call dogs man's best friend? I was thinking I could go through this room and I actually could name a lot of your animals. I know Annie and Gracie, okay? I know, I always call your cat Stubbs because he's missing a tail, okay? I know Yogi. I know Bryson. I know a lot of different family friends that I know that we just love our critters. I have to tell you that these are 2 of my favorite family members. Do you know why a dog is man's best friend? If you lock your wife in the trunk of the car for 5 hours and you lock your dog in the trunk of the car for 5 hours, which one of them is happy to see you when you open the trunk? The dog or the wife? Well, of course, the dog. That's why they're man's best friends. When the kids were little and Caleb was in the kind of cry it out phase, Riley, the fluffier one of the 2 on the screen behind me, Riley would get all concerned because Caleb was crying, and she would come to our door and start whimpering like, are you going to parent this kid or am I going to have to? And if we didn't do anything, she'd run and she'd go sleep underneath his crib because she had that instinct to protect him. In fact, the kids wanted to sleep in the basement last night, and the reason they want to sleep in the basement is the dogs aren't allowed to sleep upstairs, so if they want to sleep with the dogs, they sleep downstairs. When Leslie and I have been canoeing, there's this terrible thing that happens. She'll get out in the middle of the lake, and the dogs will come out to the lake, and they will start swimming in circles to check on her. They don't want to get far away from her, and they'll swim until they look like they're really about to drown, and then they'll kind of paddle their way back, and then once they catch their breath, they go back out and stay close to her again. I go out to the middle of the lake, and they just look at me on the side like, stinks to be you. You made bad choices. But they are so loyal to Leslie and the kids. I don't know that I should tell you this, but I like most dogs I meet better than most people I meet because I've never had a dog gossip about me or insult me in a church foyer. I've never had a dog say something mean about me on Facebook or write me an anonymous letter. Have you been to Walmart? Again, would you rather go to the Pound or Walmart? It's louder at one than the other, and it smells better at one than the other, and I'm not sure which is which. If you gave me the choice, I would probably vote for a dog for president this fall. If a dog would run for Congress, I might go for it. Did you know that in the town of Talkeetna, Alaska, for about 18 years, a cat was the mayor? And things worked for 18 years. Something to think about. I'm not suggesting anything, but if you want to write somebody in. I don't have a whole lot of hard and fast rules for life outside of Scripture. But one of my hard and fast rules for life is I will not watch sad dog movies. You cannot make me. I think I still carry some emotional trauma from when Dad showed me Old Yeller as a child, and in 4th grade when they made us read Where the Red Fern Grows. Leslie was a cruel and terrible wife one day, and she put Marley and me on in the car while I was driving, and I couldn't help but hear it. And that's been about 8 years, and I still haven't forgiven her because I don't do sad dog movies. What is it about dogs? You might say the sermon has gone to the dogs, and so it has. But what is it about them? They seem like loyal companions, right? Man's best friend. Their faithfulness, I think, touches our hearts. That's the picture I want you to have in your brain. It's not a great picture, but it's the best I can do as we approach our text in Hebrews 3 today. When we pick up in Hebrews 3, I want you to notice the first word. I've highlighted in verse 1, the therefore. And if you've been around many Bible teachers, usually they tell you something like, if you see a therefore in Scripture, you need to look and see what it's there for. It's a logical term that connects 2 passages. It's kind of the too long didn't read introduction marker of the Bible. Whatever comes after that therefore is kind of the point of all the stuff that came before it. This is kind of the second or third major therefore in Hebrews. In Hebrews chapter 1, we talked about the angels and how incredible and how powerful they were and how Jesus is superior to them. And then at the end of Hebrews chapter 2, verse 1 actually says, since the Jesus message is even greater than the angel's message, therefore we ought to listen to Jesus even more carefully. Chapter 2 talked about how Jesus is totally in charge of everything. No matter what it looks like, no matter how much pain it is, no matter what, Jesus is in charge. And the fact that he suffered doesn't say that that's not true. It's actually evidence that it is true, that he went through what we went through. And then you get to chapter 3, verse 1. Therefore, what were he supposed to do on the basis of all of chapter 1 and all of chapter 2 boils down to two words. Therefore, consider Jesus. Consider Jesus. By the way, this is the first direct imperative of the book. Hebrews doesn't use a single direct command in chapter 1 or chapter 2. The first one is here. So this is the first instruction that Hebrews gives you. Hebrews says, hey, you, wake up, look at Jesus. And at first glance, that sounds like such a simple little instruction, right? We're at church. We're looking at Jesus, right? It says it right on the table. This do in remembrance of me. It sounds like such an obvious thing that a book of the Bible would say. Think about Jesus. Jeffrey, what's the answer to every question in Sunday school? Jesus. There you go. Think about Jesus. But before you read past these words too quickly, I want to ask, how well do we do really looking at Jesus? This word, by the way, is not an I word. It's a brain word. It's the word that means think on top of, turn it over in your brain. It's the same word that in the Gospels, when the chief priests and the Pharisees tried to set Jesus up with some trick questions. Do you remember the times that happened? Jesus perceived in them the wickedness of their hearts. That phrase, perceived in them, is the same word that it's using right here. Perceive in Jesus. The text is telling us, look at Jesus. A whole lot of people have a really kind of two-dimensional flat picture of Jesus. Yeah, I've seen Jesus. Are you sure? I mean, a lot of people have a version of Jesus that is so vanilla, so harmless, so meek, and so mild that they don't understand how he could possibly have gotten crucified. He's basically Mr. Rogers with blonde hair, blue eyes, a white guy in a white dress and a blue sash, and he floats everywhere he goes. That's not the Bible picture of Jesus. Of course, if you grew up in another type of atmosphere, you might have a picture in your head of a Jesus who is impossible to please. And that's not quite the biblical picture of Jesus either. Consider Jesus. Look at him closely. See all of the things that have to do with who he is. But our text tells us to consider Jesus, and in particular, it's calling us to notice one attribute about him. Do you see it in this text? Consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession, who was faithful to him who appointed him, just as Moses was also faithful in all God's house. We're called to think about, to see, to really get the faithfulness of Jesus. And to do that, the book of Hebrews is going to help us look at Moses. What is faithfulness? I mean, I could give you a dictionary definition. I could tell you that it means trustworthy or reliable or dependable. But the picture I showed you of my two dogs checking on my wife and my kids is actually a pretty good picture too. Jesus was dependable. He was faithful to his Father. He never denied him. He never betrayed him. He never let him down. He always did what he said he was going to do. The text goes on to say that Moses was faithful. And this is the basis of our comparison this morning. Now, I don't know what you think of when you think of Moses. I think of Charlton Heston and let my people go. I think of kind of strength is maybe the word that I think of when I think of Moses. Or maybe I think of him as a leader because, he's leading the children of Israel through this. I think tough. There are a lot of things that I think about when I think about Moses, but the text calls us to see Jesus as faithful in the way that Moses is faithful. Well, what does that mean? Well, think about the story of Moses. This is stuff that if you grew up in church, you kind of learned in Sunday school. Moses didn't give up. He didn't give up when things got tough. He didn't cut a side deal with Pharaoh to see if he could get the people out for a little money or something like that. Even when his own sister Miriam was stirring up trouble against him, he didn't betray her. There's actually a story in Scripture that I think will help you see this. It's in Exodus chapter 32. Do you remember the story of the golden calf? Moses goes up on the mountain with God, right? And it's this incredible experience. The mountain is thunder and lightning and earthquake. Moses is radioactive. He is shining. People can't look at him. And he is in the very presence of God being given the law of God. You remember the scene? All right, and he comes down from the mountain with 2 tablets, and they weren't made by Apple, they were written by God. You remember that? He has the 10 Commandments, and he brings those laws from God down to the people. And when he approaches the camp, do you remember what he sees? Well, here's the picture that James Hinkle took when he was there. He sees this golden calf that Aaron and the people had made. It wasn't bad enough that they made this golden calf. It's what they said about the golden calf that was so horrible. They said, "Here are the gods who delivered you out of Egypt." Now you're Moses. You were just in the presence of the real deal. You were just in the presence of God himself. And you come down and you see this dumb hunk of shiny rock, and people are saying that this thing is God. You are incensed. You are mad. You are furious. Do you remember what he does? He smashes those stones, and he just about loses it, and he turns around and he goes back up on the mountain for a powwow with God. Now here's what God says. This is Exodus 32, starting in verse 9. God says to Moses, "I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now, therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation out of you." Did you hear what God just did? God just said to Moses, "Give me 5 minutes, buddy. You stay right here, and I'm going to go right off this mountain. I'm going to go right down to that camp, and I'm going to nuke those creeps. And you and me, we're going to start us a new religion. We're going to start us a new nation. We're going to be done with those losers." Okay, you're Moses. You're in this conversation. How do you respond? You're Moses. You start thinking, God said he'd make a new nation out of me, and I wouldn't have to put up with any of those people. Do you see how that could be attractive? You know, every now and then when I'm having a rough week, I think, it'd be nice just to go live in a cave, me and God. That'd be pretty cool. Of course, then you have that realization that the person who causes all of your problems would still be in the cave with you, so that's real problematic. But I get how it's desirable, right? In fact, frankly, that's a lot of the religious landscape in the United States. The largest growing religious group in the United States right now are the nuns. And I don't mean the people who wear black dresses and are Catholic. I mean the people who say that I have none to the list of church relationships. They believe, but they don't have any sort of church relationship. That's people who want to have God, but not other people. Moses, man, I get it. Do you get how this sounds attractive? If Moses took this option, sorry, Jeff, he would have never had to go to an elders deacons meeting again. This sounds like heaven. Okay, this is amazing. Sign me up. You're Moses. You're getting an opportunity to get rid of all of these whiny, ungrateful jerks. Do you remember what Moses has been through up to this point? Right? When he showed up in Egypt and said, "I'm going to deliver you," they got mad at him. When the plagues came, they got mad at him. When they crossed through the Red Sea, they got mad at him. When they got the other side of the Red Sea, now it's not we're going to get killed, it's we're going to starve. And now that God provided manna and quail, we don't like the food. It sounds like they're a bunch of 3-year-olds. Would you take the opportunity to get out of Dodge? Of course you'd want that opportunity. Here's what Moses does. Look at the very next verse. Sorry, it's so small on the screen. "But Moses implored the Lord his God and said, 'O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Remember Abraham and Isaac and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven.'" Verse 14. "And the Lord relented from the disaster he had spoken of, bringing on his people." Do you hear what Moses just did? He was faithful to these people. Moses had every reason to say, "God, that sounds like a great idea. Smoke them." But what does he say? "Now, God, calm down. These are your people. Remember your promise. Let's keep working with them." Moses was incredibly faithful. I could imagine that story going a whole lot of different ways, can't you? Can't you imagine some kind of slimy politician who sees this as an opportunity for self-advancement? Or someone who's just tired of all of the beatdowns? But that's not what Moses did. And this isn't Moses on an extraordinary good day. You know how I know that? I know that because this story actually happens a second time in Numbers 14. That time, it's after the 12 spies go to look at the promised land. You remember, they see how good it is and how huge it is. But 10 of the spies come back and they say, no, we can't do it. The people are too big. We're like grasshoppers when we go over there. And now they start saying, we don't want Moses anymore. We just want to go back to Egypt. Give us a new leader. And God says the same thing to Moses again. Just say the word Moses and I'll zap him. But Moses intercedes for his people. He is faithful to his people. It made his life harder, but it saved theirs. I don't think Israel ever had a clue how close to death they came had it not been for the faithfulness of their friend Moses. Now, was Moses perfect? You know the answer to that. Jeffrey said the answer is Jesus. Okay, Moses is not perfect. He made mistakes. He sinned. He disobeyed God. You remember that whole beat the rock thing? There are some other stories maybe you can look. That time that God nearly killed him in the wilderness, that's a pretty significant story. Was Moses perfect? No. Was he faithful? Yes. Hebrews 3 says that Moses was faithful in God's house. I would say so. Verse 3 of Hebrews chapter 3 says that Jesus has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, as much more glory as the builder of the house has in the house itself. Now, Moses, his faithfulness is incredible. It is really impressive. But Jesus is a whole order of magnitude higher. It is incomparable how much more faithful Jesus is. The illustration in this verse is, you're impressed with the house? Don't be. Be impressed with the guy who built it. You're impressed with the artwork? No, don't be impressed with the artwork. Be impressed with the artist who could make it. Moses was faithful, yeah, but Jesus is the artist of faithfulness. He is the architect of this all along. Listen to the last half of verse 6. Christ is faithful over God's house as a son, and we are his house if we indeed hold fast our confidence and our boasting and our hope. How much more faithful is Jesus? And the text says if we're his family, if Moses was that faithful as a servant, as hired help, how much more faithful is Jesus as we're his family members? When you hear a sermon about faithfulness, most of the time we think of verses like this. We think about Revelation 2, verse 10. You hear this message that says, be faithful unto death, and you'll receive a crown of life. And then we start to think about what does it mean to be faithful. And we think, maybe that means church attendance, or maybe that means being good Bible readers. Maybe that means answering all the right questions with the word Jesus. Maybe that means eating at Chick-fil-A. I don't know what your definition of faithfulness is, but it's something. And that's important. That's one of the major messages of Hebrews. Be faithful. But if you are going to hear the message of Hebrews, be faithful, there is a message that you need to hear before that. There's a message you have to hear first. You need to hear that God is faithful to you. My charge to you to be faithful people is meaningless unless you understand that God is faithful to you first. Your ability to hold on to God, to be faithful to him, is infinitesimally small compared to his ability to hold on to you. I don't think that you're getting this, and I don't think that you hear it. We're not used to faithfulness. Maybe that's why we like our dogs so much. It feels like the only place we can get it. Let's face the reality. Most of us don't work for employers who are faithful. Now you can work somewhere 20 or 30 years, but as soon as the labor gets a little bit cheaper in another city or another place or with another contract, what happens to you? You're gone. Here's the door. Here's your watch. Okay? Our grandparents' generation generally grew up working a career at one or two employers. Most of my generation is lucky to work a career that spans half a decade. Seriously, those are what the numbers seem to indicate. Our families don't experience the type of faithfulness we wish they did. Families are breaking up more often and in more ways, and they are because someone somewhere breaks faith in that, it creates so much pain. So many kids who suffer, so many couples who suffer. Even our friendships fade as time and circumstances separate us. Even our dogs eventually die. We don't know how to live in a world where faithfulness is a real idea. The concept of someone who is truly completely, unbreakably loyal is inconceivable to us. But hear this morning. God is that. God is faithful. God is the sort of God who, if you have become a prodigal, you've said, Dad, I wish you were dead so I could have your money, and you go and you waste all of that on hookers and drugs. When you show back up, he says, I'm so glad you're home. That's faithfulness. Jesus is the sort of Lord who, when he says something, he means it. You know, we don't even know what to do with fact checkers anymore. Do we have fact checkers to fact check the fact checkers who are fact checking the and we don't know what we believe and we don't know what we think, and it's just so hard right now. But when Jesus said it, you could count on it, and there wasn't an updated statement 3 days later. Jesus is faithful. Later on in Hebrews 10:23, we get this encouragement. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is, what word is that? Faithful. Do you hear how even in Hebrews 10:23, when the author is encouraging people to be faithful, he does it on the basis of the faithfulness of Jesus. Hold fast the confession because he's holding fast to you. He's faithful. It's all over Scripture. When you're tempted, remember 1 Corinthians 10:13, no temptation has overtaken you except what's common to man, but God is faithful and provides a way out. 2 Thessalonians 3:3, the Lord is faithful, he will establish you and guard you against the evil one. 2 Timothy 2:13, if we are faithless, he remains faithful, he does not deny himself. Peter reminded the church, let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good. God is faithful. Jesus will never let you down. He is never tired of you, and he will never trade you in for a younger model that's more attractive. He doesn't fail his people. There's a scene in virtually every action movie that looks something like this. It's a trope in TV and film. You know what happens, right? You know, the two good guys are maybe up on top of a tower or a skyscraper or a cliff, and one goes over the edge, and he's hanging on with everything he's got, right? And what happens? Okay, either the rocks kind of crumble, or his fingers tire out, or, you know, there's sweat, and then he's down to one hand, right? And he's hanging on, and, you know, he's hanging on to the tips of his fingers, and is he going to live? And he's going to, what always happens in the movie next? The partner comes in and reaches down and grabs his hand, and somehow, in a superhuman act of strength, he pulls him up over the ledge. That's a picture of the faithfulness of Jesus. Someone told me that when you cross the street with your kids, you don't let them hold your hand. You hold their hand. Because if you let them hold your hand, they can let go. Squirrel! And then, you know, off they go. They find something exciting, and they wander off, and something bad happens. But you hold their hand because you're stronger, and you are protecting them. I think that's a really good picture for the Hebrews 3 picture. We're not holding God's hand. He's holding ours. And his hand is so much stronger than mine. He'll never let go. Let's stand. Let's sing.